time for prize fighters, circus freaks, and gangsters. I'm Greta.
I'm Jamie. And today we are discussing a movie that Greta recommended, and it is amazing. 2003 Master and Commander.
Yep, this time we're going to see, and instead of having to cajole Jamie into doing something, he actually enjoyed himself this time.
Thoroughly, even though this film involved both boats and horses, which are two of my no-goes.
Why no boats in movies?
I have just always found movies about boats to be incredibly dull. And in the same way that movies about horses like Black Beauty are so incredibly overwrought. Like, I am just bored to death by tales of semen. I've always hated that. That word will never not be funny. But boy, that'll come back around in the buggery of this episode. Well, there was no buggery, and that was a historical inaccuracy. But yeah, it's always been something that has bored me, and I've always found the people of the sea to be very distasteful. So I was just like, I don't know why I want to learn about this. But now I know why I want to learn about this. Boats are actually pretty goddamn cool.
Yeah. Now, part of the problem with the horse movies is for a long time you couldn't have sort of emotional romantic movies aimed at girls. And so the horse story was the substitute.
Boats and horses are probably all very female gendered movies back in the past. Because they all involved romances.
No, not so much boats.
Titanic on back. It's just like, I mean, I was always, I just didn't want that superfluous romantic storyline that they jammed into an action movie just because they wanted to get three women into the theater. I couldn't stand that. So I think I've always just shied away from that.
Yeah, well, horse-centered movies and horse-centered stories have for a very long time been sort of chick flicks before there were rom-coms.
Why is that?
Because you couldn't be too explicit with the idea of romantic love aimed at women because it might cause them to go astray.
All right. Well, there's one more.
It was to protect us, Jamie.
Why is it that every time I ask a question having to do with women in the past, the answer is always so we could keep our boots in their throats? It's all insane. It's insane.
There's a lot of insanity. It didn't have to be that way, but at some point somebody decided they wanted it to be that way. And so, it's been a very long rotation.
I identified a little bit of it today. I identified a tiny bit of it. And that was James I, King James I, who was an avowed homosexual and a virulent misogynist. And he basically started enshrining misogyny into the English legal code starting in 1603, and it went to 1625. He was just like, if you see a woman, just punch her in the eye. She deserves it.
You know that Elizabeth I, I mean, so it's sort of the anger about her. You could see that now, the anger at women who are judges and high-ranking politicians. It's that same sort of we got to get them. And we got to go after all the women.
And both with Elizabeth and Mary Queen of Scots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, they were both put into an impossible situation, and they were making the best of it. And when these two women could have used each other as a shoulder to lean on, so that they could have really succeeded, everybody just kept driving fences in between them and made them fight each other. And it was just both of their stories are so tragic.
Yeah. Both of them sort of saw other women as inferior, and they just saw themselves as sort of this blessing of heaven and no other woman. And so they really identified with other men because that was the way to fit into the power structure. Getting more rights for other women, they felt was not in their best interest. Both of them were very obsessed over the idea of marriage. Mary got married a gajillion times, whereas Elizabeth never got married because she was just the second I get married, I give up my power. So
didn't Queen Isabella of Spain marry the one man that she wanted to marry, and then she was a woman scorned? That's what caused the beef between England and Spain?
A lot of things caused the beef between England and Spain. The whole way Henry VIII treated his first wife, for example. I mean, they were just going after each other, hammer and tongs over a million things. The Catholic Protestant thing, the fact that, Spain had a whole mountain of silver. Just, they found a million reasons to hate each other. The fact that the Spanish had better wine. I mean, you name it.
But that's yet another thing that she and her cousin could have, bonded together over dinner and been like, God damn, I hate that bitch. You see how much gold she had on last time? Yeah. Did you see what she was wearing the last time? They could have been this just duo of death for Spain, but instead they were forced to fight each other.
Yeah. And it is kind of funny, as much as these Real Housewives of this, that, and the other are terrible shows that will drag people down, they do at least show women sort of being friends and working together. A lot of it's kind of toxic and dumb, but they work together on those shows? I've never, usually I just see them yelling at each other. They occasionally form alliances.
Oh, okay. Well, hey, you learn something new every day.
Yeah. I mean, it's not great, but it's still some of the first television that shows the interactions of a group of women rather than groups of men. I'm not saying it's perfect. I don't really watch it. It's something that appears in the background sometimes, but it's still unique for that.
I feel like you have really outed yourself today. But so women do form because on the show it seems as I'm flipping through channels and I'm seeing the Kardashians screaming at each other, it seems that any alliance they might form would be in the furtherance of evil. Like they were Russians or something. But you're telling me that they can have a non-malevolent purpose for an alliance on these shows?
Well, on American television, not so much, because do we know how American television works? You can't be nice.
That's one thing I love about the Korean shows, like Physical 100 and things like that.
Okay.
They constantly are complimenting each other. It warms my heart.
Well, and that's
we have strayed so far from Master and Commander.
Oh, good Lord. Okay. Well, I was going to say sort of the early British baking show, that was so lovely. And so let's get back to England. Everybody's shaking in their boots because Napoleon is about to cross the channel and take over the big island. And so Britain has gone to sea to try to whoop some frog butt.
So this movie is set in 1805, which it stated at the beginning, and it's aboard the HMS Surprise, which is the entire set piece for the movie. But the books that are beloved to you were set in 1812, correct?
Oh, no, I mean, there's 20 books. So they go for a couple of decades. I mean, Aubry goes everywhere. He finally ends up in Russia. He does a lot of stuff.
Well, that's exciting. And Aubry was based on Aubry is played, his name is Captain Jack Aubry, right? Yes, and he is played by Russell Crowe, who we all know from as Zeus most recently in Thor Love and Thunder. God, he was amazing in that movie. Did you see it?
I haven't seen that one yet. I'll have to pull that one up. As
he was like
Fat
laugh. Thor, except he was a huge pompous ass. He was basically making fun of himself. It was so amazing. Possibly his best role.
That sounds like a lot of fun, because there was a time there where we were sort of worried that we were going to lose Russell Crowe into crazy, but it sounds like he's learned how to laugh at himself and can become a much more fun person.
I think so. I think I love Russell Crowe. I've loved that man in every movie practically he's been in. And even recently, there's a movie that I'll probably try to get in the mix here. That he did where he played Jem Mace, boxing champion at exactly this time.
Yeah, that sounds like right up our alley. I mean, prize fighters, let's do it.
And he really seems to be this time period is so well suited to him. He played the violin with such expert skill in this, and apparently he learned the violin specifically for this film.
Ah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, and I was sort of laughing because on one hand, the stringed instruments were in amazing tune for being these wooden and catgut instruments at sea, but we all like in-tune music better than not, so sure, what the hell.
Except for the people serving Russell Crowe his food.
Yes.
What did they describe it as? Screechings. Yes, we'll get there.
Yes. We'll get there. So, yeah, we start out and we're just in the bowels of this ship sailing along. People are swinging in their hammocks. And at this point, these poor dudes
had a real Gangs of New York feel, right? We're coming from the underground. It's dark as hell. And I really like the fact that it wasn't super well lit. It gave you a real sense that you're like in the bowels of the ship.
We're just super happy we didn't have smell-o-vision, though.
Oh, it would have been bad. It would have been not good.
Like, I'd always sort of had in my brain, like, this is going to smell terrible. Everybody's farting in each other's faces because they've got, like, 14 inches of space in those hammocks between each other. They're eating this terrible...
Yeah, so they're all in, let's describe it. They're in this dark hold of a ship, and there's no lighting. You're following the one man with this tiny little candle light that's in a little glass enclosure with tin inside of it, lined with tin so that it gives off more light. And he's weaving his way through all of these swaying people who are asleep in these gross
canvas
rope hammocks.
But
there are animals. It jammed like 2 cows and a goat jammed into a pen that you would put 1 cow in now. And they're just standing there, not because they can't even move. So that they're not going to fall over because they literally can't move. And so this man winds his way through all of it and then finally gets up these stairs. But it really gave you a sense of how tight the quarters were.
Yeah, and so, the livestock smells on a scale of things would probably have been, like, higher as how things smelled in terms of, like, yeah, that was probably pretty comforting and good. But somebody pointed out that one of the worst smells you'd have the rats running around, and then they drown in the bilge and just rot down there. And I was like, oh my God.
So is the bilge... I know the bilge pump is how you pump the water out of the ship, and they actually showed it in this movie, which I thought was cool.
Yeah.
But where is that? It's underneath where these guys are sleeping? I don't know what the...
Yeah, okay, so the bilge is the very bottom of the boat, and the water that just sort of, like, seeps in through all the seams in the boat, because these boats in the past, were not tightly built. They couldn't be because they were of wood sitting in water, and so they'd always sort of like stretch and compress, and as the boat turned and went up and down waves, and so you had caulking, which was a mixture of rope and tar that got like shoved in between the planks of the ship. But over time that would degrade, and so there was always just this like little seepage into the boat no matter what you did. And even in modern boats,
that caulk was made of organic material, you're getting a scent of rot out of that too, so we can add that to the milieu.
The caulk probably wasn't so bad because that had tar and creosote in it, and so again, you think about dead rats versus creosote, you weren't going to want to smell the creosote.
Yeah, you're trying to huff in between the boards at that point.
Right.
Licking the tar and rubbing it underneath your nose. Oh my God. So you've got people who haven't showered in 6 months to a year.
Right.
You've got, so it's feet and ass wall to wall. And then and this is 18th century feet or 19th century feet and ass. So this is a different level. And then there's lice all over everything. Lice must have been everywhere. That's where we need the sound of buzzing flies, right? like in that episode of Kung Fu.
You could actually kind of eradicate lice on a boat just because you're out to sea. And this is one thing that always drives me crazy about these movies is these dudes have all like this nice fluffy floppy hair. Bullshit.
Oh, that cute little cabin boy with the shock of blonde hair, like, boy, he was perfectly coiffed throughout the movie.
Oh yeah. No, either these guys would have stringy, oily hair because they would oil their hair to keep it down and out of their faces, or some of them would even slick it down with tar. So there was one guy they showed who had like this long, skinny dark braid that was tarred. But these guys like just would tar their hair kind of on the regular, and then like they just wouldn't worry about it.
Tar their hair? Then what do? Just cut it off at the end?
They just have like these long raggedy locks. I mean, that is one thing that the Johnny Depp...
Those must have been the ugliest locks any human being... I mean, we all knew that white kid who tried to grow locks in college, and it was a disaster. He looked like a mess.
Don't do that.
Yeah. But these are terrible locks made by drunken rapist sailors at sea with tar. That must have been something.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody had fluffy hair. That always drives me nuts, but oh well. But because their hair was treated either with oil or with tar, it was actually possible to have a lice-free or a low-lice boat. I mean, you'd have weevils and all sorts of other problems, but you could actually get rid of the lice.
And weevil jokes. Oh my God, I love that weevil joke. I can't wait till we get to it.
Okay. All right, so...
Oh, did you notice that they wrote a little badass name on one of the cannons? It was one of the only details you could see as he's going through the thing, but right as he got to the end, you could see it was something like sudden death or something like that was carved in it was so dope, and I just thought that was such a cool little...
Oh yeah, no, it's right up there with, people like scrawling stuff on like large missiles and shells.
Yeah,
in
World War II
warfare.
airplanes, they had that whole paint, and then the analog for the guy whose job it was in World War II to paint like naked ladies on the airplane. There was that guy on these ships, except he was doing it with a chisel. It was so cool seeing this.
Yeah. So yeah, they're sort of just kind of sailing along, swinging along in the fog, and we think about navigating at this point. We've got GPS, we've got radar, we've got all of these things. These guys had their ears and these janky telescopes, handmade telescopes. And he just glimpses this ship barely through the fog. And
they also because they didn't have GPS, so they had to have a
sextant,
an hourglass, and a sextant.
Yes.
I was holding up my hands for the hourglass, but it was cool that he turned it. Was that an hour, like an actual hourglass? So that's one that they turn every hour?
I'm not sure exactly what the time period for that sand glass is, but yeah, that's how they sort of keep track of time on the ship. And so you hear 8 bells. They divide up the day into bells, and so 1 bell, 2 bells, 3 bells, and so you hear 8 bells, and these different bells are different shifts. Like everybody changes jobs or goes to sleep or whatever, because a boat runs 24 hours a day.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we never think about when we're thinking about the past. We think that we've always divided, time into hours and seconds and minutes, and that you just showed up at 2:00 on a Tuesday or whatever. When back in the day, you never knew when the hell you were going to get there. So you were like, I will get there when I get there, and that's when we'll meet. It'll be sometime around this, right? But
it'll definitely be before April.
Yeah.
Probably.
And so I guess the times during the day were kind of the same, because for sundials and things like that, I know that they would have longer hours during the day and shorter hours in the winter, which sounds weird to us because an hour is 60 minutes. But an hour wasn't 60 minutes back then. It was an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever. So,
right. Yeah. No, you pretty much, you had sun up, you had high noon, and you had sundown, and everything else was very you just sort of figure out what that was. And all 3 of
those were identified in this movie.
Yes.
Russell Crowe said, this is sunup. That is sundown. It is high noon, is it not?
Yes. And other than that was it. But yeah, so we're it's sort of one of those foggy days. It's not really clear what time it is, other than 8 bells.
Yeah. Oh, and the great thing about noon was you only know when it has been noon. You don't know, right. Oh, it's noon right now. The sun was higher then, so that was noon.
Right. Yeah, you have somebody up there sort of watching. There's a really fun movie that talks about figuring out longitude and figuring out how to keep time at sea that happens, no, it's earlier than this. Yeah, the 18th century is when they sort of figured out longitude, and it revolutionized navigation at sea. But that was a whole big deal.
I think that might have been a rediscovery. Didn't the Zheng He Chinese fleet have a method for determining longitude?
I would not be surprised if they did.
And I think it was lost.
And then the English rediscovered it independently.
Rediscovered it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we have our sailor who kind of thinks he probably might have seen another ship, and
oh yes, that was the ill-fated Holland, wasn't it? Or was his name Holland? Yes.
Hollum. Yes. Yeah, Hollum. Yeah. Anyway, so
Hollum.
They're sort of going back and forth, and finally, because he's the eldest midshipman, it's dude, you gotta make a decision. You have to choose what to do. And he's like, all right, beat to quarters. So then we get to see what this means. And so you've got the Marine who is part of the military complement on the boat beating his drums and all the different things.
There were very few of those guys, too. What were there, like 6 of them or something? I would have expected there to be more.
I think it sort of depended on what the ship's mission was and how long it was going to be out to sea and all sorts of things. And also, this is during the Napoleonic War, so you probably have most of your guys who can shoot guns on land.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. That makes sense.
But anyway, and so, yeah, you get to see sort of how they move things around. They get the cannon set up. They get the surgeon's table set up.
That man, Paul Bettany, who played, what was his name? Dr. Stephen
Martin?
Yeah, he was phenomenal in that. And the early 2000s were really his heyday, but I would love to see that man make a comeback, because Legion was a phenomenal movie that he did where he was like an archangel who came to Earth to save humanity from the angels were coming to wipe us all out, and he was like the lone angel who stood in their path. That guy's phenomenal. He can play any role, too. He was great in this as the naturalist surgeon, the naturalist adventurer surgeon.
Yeah, unlike my whining about how Russell Crowe doesn't match the image I have in my head, he was spot on. I was like, yeah, he's kind of like I imagine the Doctor. He's also the nicest.
How did you imagine Russell Crowe? Because you told me this off camera and you didn't actually say it.
Yeah, I mean, I always sort of, first of all, Jack Aubry in the books doesn't have like that deep, burning, bitter anger that Russell Crowe sort of plays the part with. And he's just like, Russell Crowe is just kind of a fire plug of a dude. And the way Jack Aubry's described is kind of a more slimmer, typical sort of stringy guy, but it doesn't matter. I was just kind of being a whiny baby about it.
English people, especially English noblemen at this time, were tiny. I've written about it in the past, but they had chest measurements that are smaller than any waist of the men that are listening to this right now. Their average chest measurement was 34 inches. I've never even heard of that. I didn't know that was a possibility as an adult male. But they were tiny people, and they really, the richer you were, the smaller and like more starved you wanted to look, because it was just weird.
Yeah, this whole sort of aesthete, wasp-waisted, delicate, it was sort of this sign of, they said it was a sign of good breeding, but really what it was proof that you didn't have to lift a fucking finger to do anything for yourself. Yep. That's really what it was about.
Yep. So you wanted to look like a bitch back then. If you were rich, and if you were an officer, you were rich.
Yeah.
So Russell Crowe, almost by necessity, would have been a bitch.
No, not necessarily. I mean, you look at the illustration of, say, Lord Nelson in that book, which was pretty accurate for what he looked like. He was still a more slender guy. But again, it's just, that's how Russell Crowe's body is built. And he's just a fire plug, and he's gonna just be Jack Aubry, and I'm like, okay, fine.
It definitely fits the ideal, though, that or the conception that a lot of white guys in the United States have. There's a website called The Art of Manliness that has really propagated this myth that the men of the 19th century were like robust, badass gentlemen who stood up for for nobility, and it's all nonsense. But they all think like the food was great back then, and all these guys were badasses who could whip anybody's ass today, and they could climb any mountain and fly any flag, and it's absurd. And it's just, the more I read about these guys, I'm just thinking, you take any modern American and put him up against a person from the 19th century, and they would just slap him around and lock him in a closet because they're too small to do anything, and they're too sickly and too filled with parasites.
Well, some of them were wiry, mean motherfuckers. Oh yes, so
certainly.
I would.
They
I
were
wouldn't
mean
want
as
to get
hell.
Scratched by whatever they had under their fingernails.
Yeah, because they had been in a hold of ship with 122 men and at least 6 barnyard animals, and like. The diseases you would get just in the hold of that ship must have been catastrophic.
Well, once you get all of the diseases once, you're like immortal now.
I guess.
if you survive them.
Yeah. You have the most robust immune system of any person ever. You can survive anything.
But for the few who actually like make it through childhood, they're bulletproof when they come to diseases until you get like yellow fever. But anyway, so we beat to quarters. It looks really cool.
Or until you like get a hangnail and it infects in your toe, and then all of a sudden you drop dead.
Well, okay, yeah, sepsis will get you every time. There's no. That's why these sailors' feet were like hard as like boiled leather. I mean, that's the other thing you have to remember. Like these guys never wore shoes ever.
Oh, they didn't wear shoes? I was thinking they're wearing wet boots all the time.
No. No.
Those guys in the movie were barefoot, and they were barefoot around Cape Horn, and I was like, what the fuck? Their feet would have fallen off. But, I guess, like, there are monks in China who can walk around barefoot in the snow.
Yeah,
so
no,
I mean,
you think about, like, the rough, scaly skin on, like, chicken feet. That's basically what these guys' feet were like. The officers wore shoes. But all of the waisters and the able seamen and everything, like, they would have been barefoot 24/7, 366.
What is a waster?
Okay, so a part of the boat is called the waist, WAIST. Okay. So it's WAISTERS, wasters. And so they're the guys who hang out in the waist of the ship. It's not like wastrel, WASTE, like, oh my God, you're such a waste of space.
Okay, so did they have specific jobs that they did? Because you said they were specific of like separate from the seamen, is the way you.
Yeah, and well, they had a set of jobs, and so they tended to do sort of the more kind of housekeeping, maintenance-y type jobs, whereas the able seamen would be the ones who would be like climbing the ropes and letting down the sails and doing the more complicated stuff. And wasters also tended to be involved with like food service and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes.
So would that the black gentleman who was in the food service, would he have been a slave, or had the British abolished slavery at that time? Do you know?
No, slavery is abolished in 1808. However, he might have been a freedman because it was fairly typical to just sort of pick up people who could sail boats in this period. I mean, the U.S. is about to go to war with Britain for Britain just stopping U.S. ships and just kidnapping sailors off there saying, God damn it, you're a British citizen, yoink.
Yeah, I just read about that. So that was a lot of our beef with them, was just that they would take any person who was born a British citizen, who is any person basically who was over the age of 16, and then they're making them or over the age of 20, and they're making them a member of the British Navy against their will.
Yeah, because at this point, the British were still on the "you're a sailor because we tell you to." Like, they hadn't raised their wages since like 1725 or something, and it's 1805. Oh my God. Yeah. So
they're fired. So they just see like a private American ship, and they'd fire on it, killing half the people, and then the rest of them, they'd be like, were you born in Britain? All right, you're part of the Navy now.
I don't know. They'd even just listen to their vowels. They wouldn't even like ask them. They just tell them to like recite something. You're like, well, you sound British to me.
Yeah, exactly. Or shit, they just be like, can you speak English? Get the fuck on our boat.
Right. So instead of improving conditions, they were just going around basically kidnapping people off of other boats, kidnapping people off of the streets, emptying the jails right onto the ships. And so something we'll talk about in a little bit here about maintaining discipline, that was very real because you're dealing with some bad, angry motherfuckers off the street on your boat.
Yeah. So there were prison ships at this time. I know of that were littering the harbors of England.
Right.
Were they actually so they were just taking people? Sometimes a lot of times they were sailors, right, and they would just throw them in another boat that would they leave in a harbor? Is that how that would work? Or were these prison ships also like fighting?
No, so the prison ships were what were called hulks. So basically boats that were no longer seaworthy. They were dismasted, or they just like couldn't sail around. So they were just like they were like the world's crappiest houseboat, basically.
Oh my God. So the leakage was way worse because these were old boats.
Right.
Oh.
And then they're just sitting in the harbor, so you don't have like nice wind going through, like
and they're
getting
crazy
the
overcrowded.
smells out.
Yeah.
And the reason they had to do this is it used to be if you had people who were in prison and you just kind of wanted to get rid of them, you sent them to America as an indentured servant. But then America's like, no more prisoners from you because we're our own country. They're like, well, what the hell are we going to do with all these people? So they started putting them in all these boats in the harbor, and then that got too overcrowded, and then somebody came up with the bright idea of Australia!
That was perfectly in unison.
Yeah, Australia becoming a prison colony was because the U.S. stopped accepting British prisoners.
Wow. All right. Well, but the Navy was essentially just a prison in motion.
It was. But you had to be like a certain ableness. Like if you already were missing limbs or were blind or were too old or whatever, like they wouldn't put you onto a ship to work for the British Navy.
Oh.
So you had to meet a few requirements.
They had some.
Yeah. And no women and well, okay, I was going to say no children, no girl children.
And there were some women who dressed as men to sneak on ships because that was in the Robert Louis Stevenson book, Treasure Island.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. But I'm just saying when they were emptying prisons to put people on boats.
Oh, gotcha.
They weren't taking any women prisoners. That's
gotcha,
all.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're back to the first fight, which looked horrible because all I could think of was, my God, splinters. Like, just...
Oh, yeah. So we have the boat... finally, like, okay, it's definitely there in the fog, and the real first glimpse everybody gets of it is you see the explosions as they're shooting cannonballs at the Surprise. So this time the Surprise got the surprise, and yes, and this is where the splinters come in.
Yes, because so how thick were these hulls? They mentioned that the other ship had a hull that was 2 feet thick. Theirs must have been at least a foot thick.
Yeah, and like they're built on these again, I'm trying to do like motions and you can't
we're
see
gonna
me,
have to add, we're gonna have to add video at some point soon.
But yeah, it's these old boats were built sort of these like crisscross fashion. You had ribs like like your ribs kind of going around, and then you had planks going across. And when later on they show how the Acheron, this other ship, was built, it's built like in this extra crisscross fashion of American oak. And so the American oaks at this point are older, so they're more dense. So yeah, you just have a hell of a time getting through them.
Whereas they were using, because they'd been cutting down the trees for thousands of years in Europe, they had
right.
Yeah, their trees weren't as robust, and also their hull wasn't as thick, right?
Right. Because they didn't have as much wood for sure. And so, yeah, Surprise is like shooting at this other ship, and this other ship is just wailing on the Surprise.
Just beating the shit out of them. Because they were broadside, so they caught them broadside, right? And which means that, like, they caught them at a 90-degree angle, so they could bring all their guns to bear on one side.
Broadside is side to side. That's how they were doing it. And then they came around to the back, and it's called raking.
Oh, okay.
When you're able to do your broadside against the hull or the bow or the stern of your boat, and they were able to rake the stern, and that's when they went kaplowy on the rudder.
Oh, so that's awesome foreshadowing then as well, which I just realized. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
So this maneuver we will see later in this film, and so that's excellent. But they managed to. So all these cannonballs are flying through this hull, and I'm like, they're all gonna die right out of the gate? Because I'm just imagining, like, everybody must have gone blind just getting splinters in their eyes constantly. I mean, how many splinters could a person get in their eye before their eye just jumps out of their head and runs away? But it's just constant, like, splinters flying in your face because there are all these cannonballs, like, blasting through the hull.
Yeah, and it was funny. Mythbusters did a show saying, okay, you heard that it wasn't the cannonballs that got you in these naval battles, it was the splinters. And so they like did this whole thing where they like shot cannonballs into what they had as like a boat hull, and they're like, these splinters aren't so bad. And I'm like, okay, first of all, you're not making it with the right wood. The wood that's going to be hit with these cannonballs is going to be making splinters like you can't even imagine. I mean, that's how the poor kid loses his arm. He gets a bunch of splinters through his arm.
And he was an adorable little kid. Yeah. But
oh yeah, no. Every time I see this movie, I am amazed at how well this kid's acting.
He acted his ass off and then quit. He's an executive producer now. He actually executive produced Malevolent. That
oh, awesome.
Yeah.
So I was really impressed with this kid. He did a great job. And that was another thing. So you have this battle going on. You're like, why are these little kids running around in these fancy outfits? It's because they're the midshipmen. They're the junior officers. They're all like 11.
Yeah, he must have been 13 if he was a day.
Yeah.
He couldn't have been any older than that, but he's acting like a little badass through the whole thing. And he's ordering adults around, which I found fascinating because if in my life some 13-year-old tried to order me around, I would just start laughing. I can't even imagine a scenario in which I would listen to a 13-year-old.
And yet this comes down to sort of the discipline of the ship. There were parts of the ship you could and could not go on depending on your rank. You think of, British and European society is very hierarchical. That was times 1,000 on a boat because everybody has limited space and just the rules are just so rigidly enforced lest chaos just break out.
So his parents would have purchased that spot for him on the ship, right? As a midshipman? Okay, so he would have had at least merchant class parents or something like that who maybe were hoping that his kid could become a captain and get nobility.
Right. And he was probably like a third son.
Very high risk path to upper like the upper class mobility.
Right.
A very, very high risk. But he
might have been a fourth son in a noble family already. It's like we already have the heir, we've got the clergyman, we've got the soldier. So I guess you got to see. I don't know.
And that kid loses an arm at 13. And at first they just say it's broken, right? But then it gets septic and yeah.
Yeah. It looks like it's probably like a compound fracture. Well, and he had these big splinters of wood that just went through there, and we're lacking some nice.
Going back to the Mythbusters thing, I love that show, but neither of those assholes has ever fallen into a cactus. You fall into a cactus once, just bump into a cactus once on a jog, and then tell me that those splinters are nothing. Go fuck yourself. Oh my God.
Oh no, the thing they were objecting to is like when they hit the pieces of wood with cannonballs, they didn't splinter the way they thought they would. I'm like, okay, first of all, you're not hitting it with the right cannonball, but also you're using pine, you dipshits.
Oh, is pine not an acceptable material for ships?
Well, the outside planking and the floorboards would all be sort of like oak and locust and all sorts of things. You'd want pine for the mast because you'd want them to be whippy and flexible. In fact, that was another thing the British were pissed off about is American pine was like the best stuff for mast remaining in the world at this point. And so that was the whole thing about the French ship being American made is they had really nice American oak, but they also had really tall, stable American pine for their masts, where at this point the British were having to get their mast pines from like the Baltic and like piece it together so it wasn't as sturdy.
Interesting.
I could go on about this forever. But anyway, yes.
I am fascinated by it, and I'm also fascinated by the fact that anybody could think that 50 cannonballs coming through the side of a wooden ship isn't going to create a psychotic amount of injuries from spalling. Yes. It would have to.
Yeah. And, it does. Some poor guy gets a compression fracture, and so we get to see trepanning. In other words...
Oh, I learned about trepanation when I was a little kid and have always found this fascinating. It was in Dallas. They had a natural history museum that had this huge life-size exhibit. It was like a huge diorama, basically, that was cavemen doing trepanation.
Okay.
And so this has been done for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, drilling into people's skulls to relieve the pressure and let the ghosts out of their blood and whatever.
And it's
so do you want to describe how trepanation occurs?
Sure. So this guy gets a fracture, so his skull is sort of like squeezing his brain, and his brain is swelling, and so he's got pressure, and it's going to cause all sorts of terrible things. And so the doctor opens a flap of skin and chips out a little circle of bone and boop, removes the bone to sort of let the blood and the pressure out.
The size of a guinea coin. So this is like a 2 inches by 2 inches.
And my favorite part is is the sailors are all sitting around as this is a form of entertainment because there is nothing to do. So watching a dude's head get cut open, sure, why not?
And not only is a dude's head getting cut open, but everybody on the ship is crowded around like this is a medical theater. And at one point, the guy's like, is that his brain? And he's like, no, that's not his brain. That's just some blood. No, this is his brain. And all of them just peer over like, oh. So now he is in the bowels of a ship.
No, he was up on deck. Come on.
Oh, was he up on deck?
Yeah, so the doctor could have good light.
Oh, yes. But still, I'm just thinking of the amount of disease that must have ended up getting into this man's brain. That he survived is a fucking miracle.
Well, because since he was bleeding out, that probably protected him from getting anything too nasty in there.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Yeah. And they had given him laudanum prior to doing that, which I found interesting because I didn't know that was common practice, but it makes perfect sense. And I'm glad to finally see that somebody was thinking, my God, let's give this man some drugs before we cut his head open.
Well, this particular doctor who's buds with Jack Aubry in the books as well, like he is an especially good doctor. He is an unusually good doctor for a doctor at sea.
Well, he isn't simply just a doctor at sea, though. He is a naturalist, which is, I guess, the forerunner to biologists, right?
Right. And so he was sort of one of these unusual people who was doing doctoring at sea because he was curious about the world, not because he'd gotten kicked out of every other doctor job on land.
And so what differentiates a naturalist from a biologist? Basically, is that just the dawn of modern science? Is that where they cross the threshold?
Yeah, for a long time, he'd sort of be lumped in with natural philosophers. And so people who studied the natural world versus the chemical world, alchemy, they were all sort of like jumbled together. And it was really sort of as science became a thing and the idea of chemicals and molecules and all of that stuff being figured out by guys like Lavoisier, you started to sort of separate apart chemistry and biology and physics and everything. And so, here we are in the 19th century. And so being a naturalist or what would become a biologist is starting to become its own thing. Charles Darwin is going to sort of get going in about 20 years from now.
Oh, I was under the impression that Charles Darwin had already happened in this film because it seemed like he was almost following, but I guess Darwin was following the same thread everybody else was following. So they were all trying to classify these different animals, and they were all making notes about them and then sharing their notes. So that they could, so
the naturalists were like interviewing the whalers at the docks, like, oh, hey, everybody's telling me about this like weird island where there's like giant tortoises that are extremely tasty. And so the naturalists found out about the Galapagos from the whalers who would stop there to get water and food.
Okay, and then these aristocrats at the Naturalist Society in Britain hear about it, and they go, and they're talking through their massive mustaches, and then they decide to send off this intrepid explorer to go investigate it and come back with his findings. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So, but anyway, they have this big battle. The Acheron, the French ship, comes around behind. It rakes their hull. It blows off their rudder, so they cannot steer anymore. They're dead in the water, and that's when Jack Aubry sends his sailors out in the rowboats, and they tow the boat in a different direction. This all works because everything's going down in the fog and nobody can see shit.
He has some sneaky ass ways of getting out of sticky situations. Right. I love it.
Yeah. That's Jack Aubry's thing. Like and that's why he's like Lucky Jack, and like he's always coming up with ways to get out of these like surely you're gonna die this time situations. And so that's why his sailors love him so much.
Yeah, he really could write the art of naval war. Like, he is the naval Sun Tzu, this guy.
And, but even though they escape, the boat is fucked. I mean, it's got holes in it everywhere. That's where you see the bilge pump. Those guys are down there with the big pump and the bellows and everything, getting the water out. They're putting sailcloth on to stop the water from coming in. You know, they're patching things up. They're just trying to keep this thing afloat. And, you know, they have to put some sort of other emergency rudder in there. You know, the boat is in trouble. And any normal, sane person would take it ashore and refit it. But Jack Aubry, goddammit, he is so wound up about this boat. He is going to find a fucking sandbar off the coast of Brazil, lean it over, and repair it in like 4 feet of water.
The man is nothing if not driven. I mean, throughout this movie, once he sets his eye on a target, he does not stop until he has completed that thing. I mean, I shared something this morning that was like, if you want to make a world champion, all you need is an autistic person and steroids. And like Jack Aubry on steroids would have conquered the entire world.
Yeah. Especially since he seemed to be a guy that people would follow.
Yeah,
that was a big one. And we get once it gets refit, we get the scene where they get some extra food. I appreciated the fact that they had the officials speaking Portuguese, not Spanish, because they were in Brazil, God damn it, and that was great.
That was awesome. Yes. Obrigado was the word I picked up, or I caught, which I only know because I love eating at Brazilian steakhouses.
They get some new food. We get a little scene seeing how the captain eats, and that silver container thingy that had the cooked...
What were they? What was that? Oh, so was that duff? Or
no? So that's going to be some sort of sea pie. That probably had a crust and some sort of meat inside.
It was a beautiful rectangular silver serving tray, and then he opened it up, and it looked like flan.
Yeah, no, it's just a pie of some sort that was cooked in there. But the important thing is the captain's meal was cooked in that silver thingy. And it was cooked over a whale oil burner, whereas all of the men are going to be eating out of like a big cauldron over a fire, and it's just going to be, lobscouse or duff or just pots of crap.
So lobscouse was a salt meat stew that had potatoes and onions in it, right?
Right.
And then the duff was a steamed pudding made with dried fruit. I don't even know what steamed pudding is.
Okay, so...
Can you explain it? It kind of looked like a Jell-O mold or something.
It pretty close. So basically you put flour and fat and some liquid in there, and then you take whatever dried fruit and just sort of... and some sugar if you're lucky, a little salt, and you just make a dough, and then you wrap it in a cloth, and you would either boil it, you just like stick it in water. Sometimes they'd stick it in the stew. Or you would put it in a basin inside a container with boiling water. So some sort of bowl or basin and steaming it that way. That's typically how it would be done at a home, and that's how traditional plum puddings are made. But if you're at sea and you already have limited water, you're going to actually dunk it into a pot of boiling water because you don't want to like just steam this water away. And you might actually cook a bunch of these duffs ahead of time, and you just sort of like hang them in the cabin.
That's interesting. So it was plum, and so they used dried plums, right? Because they couldn't use fresh plums.
Oh God, no.
And
plum meant any sort of dried fruit, but a lot of times it was plums. Just because England is overrun with plum trees.
Gotcha. I can't stand plums, so I was like, is there any other flavor of this? But I did look up the nutrition because I was curious, and a plum duff gives you 28 grams of fat, 142 grams of carbs, and 10 grams of protein. And then the lobscouse is made with like if you were to make it yourself, it would be a pound of salt meat, a pound of sea biscuit, which was the ingredient I forgot, and a pound of potatoes. Yep. And so sea biscuit was hardtack, right?
Yeah, it's just, and the reason it was usually called sea biscuit is it would be a different shape, a different size. It was made by the Navy instead of the Army. Yeah,
okay.
That was really the difference.
Now with extra weevils.
The ones at sea were always full of weevils, and so that was part of your protein allowance.
Was it really? Well, I guess they were eating them because they were hungry.
Yeah, no, it was very common for like the weevils to contribute reasonably to a sailor's protein allotment.
There were so many weevils at this time, people, that weevils played in the film. So they are the captain now. This is not the people who are eating duff and lobscouse. These are people who are sat down at a white linen table, eating with silver, and there are worms on the plate coming out of their rolls. They're fresh dinner rolls. So these
no. Those were hardtack. Those were
were they? Okay.
Because you could see all the perforations in the top. Yeah, I mean they might be more like beaten biscuits, so they weren't quite so dense. Like you didn't have to soak them for an hour to get into them, but they were still hard baked bread.
You had to soak them for an hour to eat them. No. That's how hard they were. So they were a rock.
The regular sailor hardtack, if they'd been sitting around for a while, yeah.
Ooh, fuck. That's awful.
And so that's why you're boiling the stew for so long. You're partly boiling the salt meat, but you're also boiling the hardtack down to a mush that you can... Because remember how good these guys' teeth were, too.
Oh, yeah. They needed soft food. They needed some soft food because... They must have, the state of their mouths must have been, God only knows. Were these guys, they must have had scurvy because I saw like they were eating some carrots sometime, which I guess was their only vitamin C, but that was about it.
By this point, in the 19th century, they'd sort of figured out the citrus thing, and so they would typically have lemon or lime juice on board. It depends on where we are in British history, whether it was lemon or lime juice. Once they had more colonial islands where they could grow limes, it was always limes. But before then, they were getting lemons, which actually have higher vitamin C content. But if you don't own the island, why go with the better thing? Go with the thing that's going to make you more money. That was always...
Where do lemons come from anyway?
In Europe, they originally were coming from sort of the Levant, that sort of far eastern part of the Mediterranean, and they crept forward. And Sicily was a big lemon growing region. We can go into the origins of the mafia and how that's linked to lemon growing someday. Yeah,
that's fun. Well, they were a maritime. They were a maritime power, so it makes sense that they were big on lemon growing. And I'm sure that they picked that up from the Phoenicians back in the day because that's where the Levant is, and they were seafaring peoples. It must have just been one of those things we lost over time.
Lemon sort of came from the area between China and India and sort of wandered out from there in both directions. Yeah, so scurvy was preventable at this age. It was just whether or not your captain felt like doing anything about it.
And this was the guy to do something about it. So we know Captain Jack Aubry was taking care of it.
Yeah, he was taking care of his dudes.
So there was a hilarious joke that he made about the weevils that came up later, and I want to bring it up because it's funny.
Yes.
So he is just schmammered. This man's 6 sheets to
the whole
wind.
Table is.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're all completely fucked and half drunk. And he asked the doctor... which weevil he would pick of the two weevils that are on the plate with the rolls.
And the doctor says, well, I guess I would go with the larger one.
Yeah, and then they kind of go through like, you in the Navy, you have to learn to pick the lesser of two weevils. And so he picked the wrong one. And it was amazing.
And they are so drunk. They are laughing at themselves so hard. It's a pretty endearing scene.
And then they strike up music, and they are playing the violin, and what is that, a cello or a bass?
It's a cello, yeah.
A cello, yeah. And the two guys who have been serving them start bitching about it, and it says something about, like, he can't stand their screechings, and that, like, why wouldn't they play something that they could dance to? And the one guy says, you like it, and he says... only if I was as drunk as Davy's sow, which I was like Googling it. And I discovered that in 1811, there was this guy whose name was David Lloyd. And he used to show this 6-legged sow as a circus freak. Okay. And so it was a sideshow attraction. And one day he went to the stall where he kept the cow, and instead of finding the cow there, he found his drunk ass wife.
Oh no!
And so that's where that saying came from, and it was very popular in Britain at the time.
They get everything fixed up. They're reprovisioned. They're chasing after the Acheron, and they have to go around Cape Horn, which...
yeah, they were already in this horrible storm. And all the sailors are looking at him like, what the fuck are we doing? Can we turn around? This is psychotic. Because their orders were only to go to Brazil, which it said at the beginning of the thing. They were only supposed to go to northern Brazil or something. And so now they're past Paraguay, past Uruguay, and they're going around the...
They're heading for Antarctica!
Yes, headed straight...
Yeah, the ship has, like, icicles hanging off of it. I mean, it's insane. Because they can't just go straight west to chase the ship. And so he's like, well, go around the wind. So they just keep heading south. And the Straits of Magellan are hell.
And these sailors are already aware of the fact that this area is a fucking graveyard for ships. I just read about it recently. 3,000 to 4,000 ships are sunk around that area in between Argentina and Antarctica. And it's not a very wide gap between those two, but they sank like crazy because the weather there's insane, apparently.
The continent of Antarctica, and then they have what they call the mixing bowl around it. It's just this loop of water that can just like get going and going and going, just streaming around the continent there. And so there is a treasure trove of ships from all different ages down there in Tierra del Fuego, that very southern tip of South America, of Cape Horn. But nobody's going to go do ship archaeology because it's fucking dangerous down there. You're going to die.
Yeah, it's still dangerous, even with modern equipment. Yeah, but these guys are down there with this rinky-dink bullshit ship that they've already said was slower and much older than the ship that they're chasing. But they're just like, hell, we got it. We got Captain Jack on our side.
So they do finally get around Cape Horn and they head north. Yay!
Yay! Well,
in this case, heading north is great.
They had to go south before they could go north, though. And when he said, yeah, turn due south, everybody looks at him like, are you out of your fucking mind? Like, we're not trying to go...
we don't want to go to Antarctica.
We don't want to high-five a penguin today. Like, let's keep it moving.
No!
Yeah.
So they finally get around. Yeah, and this is where you're talking about, like, aren't these guys' toes freezing off? I'm sure some of them did... get a little frostbitey because yikes, man.
I just can't even imagine. I don't even know how cold it is. That was one of the few things I didn't Google about this, but my God.
It was miserable. But yeah, they do know about the Galapagos from all of the different whalers, and they start heading for it, and everybody is thrilled. The naturalist, because he's heard the stories about the crazy-ass stuff that lives there, but the sailors are pumped because they know that those big-ass tortoises are great eating.
You glossed over the big reveal, Jack's big reveal, which was he had the chef do a duff or a pudding in the shape of the Galapagos Islands, and then he brought it out to the table, and he asked everybody which, like, what they thought it was, and the one-armed kid, like this cute little kid goes, it's the Galapagos Island, and he gets his hair tousled by the captain, and he's like, yeah, you're right, we're all drunk as shit, even this 13-year-old kid.
Yes, they even.
But he knows more geography than you, this drunk-ass little kid. Yeah.
That was a pretty fun scene, and you just sort of have to think, like, the cook for Jack, I think his name is Pudding, or they call him Pudding, but he probably could have, like, still murdered people, and he would have kept his job, because somebody who can cook like that on that little dinky burner in that little dinky galley, they're like, I don't care what you do. If you keep feeding me good food, you still have this job.
He's got to be the most well-paid ship's cook in history, because he was like the galley chef on a Russian billionaire's yacht.
Yeah. Basically, any of these cooks for captains, like, they would take them with them. Once they had a guy who could cook well for him on his boat, like, the cook could do no wrong, basically. He would protect him from hell, high water, and prosecution. Because he was an invaluable treasure.
Well, there you go. And you know what I was thinking, and it kind of going to that. So the one man who would be immune from prosecution for buggery on this ship would have been that man. And when I saw that little kid, I was like, that cute little boy must just be a rape puppet for these weird old seamen. And in real life, he probably would have. I did a little digging, and they called it buggery back then, and it was very, very common, but very discreet. And in 1806, they actually hung more people in Great Britain for sodomy than they did for murder.
I can believe it.
Because
it degraded the moral character
for those men.
Murder just happens, though. So, sometimes you just got to let that go. But on the other hand, that kid was an officer, and depending on what rank he had, he might have been protected just by his family connections. It's hard to know.
Well, they did hang a lot of ship's captains for banging the cabin boys. So again, I guess that would have been it. But I guess if they were hanging ship's captains, they could have hung a ship's cook. But they also gave them 500 to 1,000 lashes sometimes. And when I was reading that, I was like, well, those people died, right? You don't survive.
Right, yeah. Typically, that many lashes is when you were being lashed in front of the fleet. And so you had basically done some sort of treason, or you had been caught for piracy or something. And so what they would do is you would be in the port in London or Plymouth or whatever, and they would turn out all the sailors, and they would have to stand on their boats and watch as this boat was rowed in between all of the vessels, and this guy was whipped. And so it was sort of like...
Holy shit! That is way more gnarly than anything you're going to see on YouTube. That's some rotten.com shit right there. Oh my God, I'm dating myself again.
And they would talk about how, they would whip them down to their bones. And this was sort of like, if you fuck up like this is what will happen to you.
If that happened in the modern day, they would do it to that Devo song. Whip it. Correct that whip.
Yeah. So anytime you see a punishment of like that much, it's definitely more for the people who are watching it.
That sounds weird.
As like a preventative measure to be like, yeah. And then they'd, like, if it was for piracy, they'd do something like that, and then they would like basically tie him to a post and like wait for the tide to come up on him to finish drowning him.
Oh my God. And the salt water in your wound as they're whipping you to death. Jesus, you'd just be praying for a bullet.
Yeah.
The English Navy was not a place to play back in the day.
No. So
that does not sound like it would have been a good time.
Yeah. So they're heading for the Galapagos Islands. And they make it there, and everybody's excited. And they're like, we're going to reprovision. We're going to eat there. My doctor bud, you can go do all the exploration. And they're just about to land there. And then this rowboat sort of comes out of nowhere. And they're like, hey, the whole reason you were coming around here is to like defend the whaling ships. That's the reason Jack gave. He's like, well, we were a whaling ship and we just got our ass kicked by this stupid ship. And so Jack goes yoink and pulls the guys.
Boy, he did that to that doctor a number of times, because that doctor had a visible erection every time he was like, we're going to the Galapagos Islands. He was like, sweet, I'm going to find all these new things, and the Society for Naturalists is going to love me, or whatever it was called. And yeah, every time.
So they chase after the Acheron again with these whalers on board, and they get becalmed. They're in... Who
they immediately impressed into the ship's crew. There was not a question. Russell Crowe just looks over and he's like, put these men on the ship's rolls, and that's it. That you work for me now.
Well, I mean, they're going to be passengers? This is a ship of war. Are you insane? I mean,
I don't know. It just was like, I was like, damn, these men were just stranded on a desert island for 10 days, and like, you're like, well, here, have a drink. All right, you work for me now. Get your ass up that mast.
Yeah. I mean, also putting them on the ship's rolls meant that they were entitled to a ration now. And so, like, it was kind of like, you work for me now. But on the other hand, it's like now you're within the rules of the ship and the hierarchy of the ship. And it's just a way of regularizing things. You can't just have people wandering around loose on a ship of war. Because, again, the hierarchy is super important. And we see that. The ship is becalmed, and everybody, like, I guess you can only jack off so many times before even that's no fun anymore. And they're just sitting on this boat. There's no wind, so it's extra stinky because, there's no fresh air coming through there.
No fresh air, no fresh water, no fresh anything. These guys are just stuck.
No.
In hell.
And that guy, Holm, who spotted the ship at the very beginning, it turns out that the crew just doesn't like him. He's kind of a sniveling little idiot. You find out that he's 30 years old, and he's still a midshipman.
Yeah, who's working with the 13-year-old kid. He's the same rank as the 13-year-old kid. Right, because
he's never been able to like get a higher rank. And the sailors start...
Well, the man who has been trepanned, who now is talking and he's grumbling all these weird premonitions about how they're all going to die because of this ghost ship. And why is anybody listening to this crazy man with a guinea coin stuck in his head where his skull should be? I don't know. But they're all like, oh, yes, sage, crazy old rapist man, tell us more. And he's like, Harlem is cursed and we're all going to die.
Yeah, calls him Jonah. Like, you know, that we're going to all get eaten up by whales.
Jonah and the whale,
and everything. And so one of the sailors, like, on purpose, like, shoulder bumps Holum. And Holum is too chicken shit to do anything about it, which pisses off Jack. He's like, you can't fucking do that. The whole order of the ship is going to come tumbling down.
Yeah, you got to assert yourself. And then he just starts apologizing and stumbling over his own feet. And Captain Jack's like, what are you, 26? Like, you failed this test 3 times. What the fuck's wrong with you? And he's like, no, I'm 30. And he's like, oh, my God, what is wrong with you? And he just kind of more stumble bum bullshit.
Yeah, Jack tries to give him a little bit of a buck up, son speech, but everybody knows it's no good. But in order to keep order on the ship, it's a 12 lashes for the guy who bumped Holman, which of course pisses off the guys even more. Because Holm could have just turned around at the time he did that and said, don't you fucking do that, given him a whack across the face, and that would have been the end of it. But he didn't, and so this guy ends up getting flogged.
Yeah, and so now every time he goes down in the hold, all these seamen, all these salty dogs are just saluting the shit out of him, but mad dogging the hell out of him.
Oh,
but they're all making a show of saluting him and following him around, saluting him, so that they don't get lashed too. But it's super insolent. The implication is we're going to kill you the second you close your eyes.
Yeah. And he just starts having anxiety, and, you know, poor kid. I mean,
he has a literal anxiety attack on a ship full of angry 19th century men who are on a prison boat, basically.
Right.
And they don't think too much of his anxiety attack. Little Lord Fauntleroy can't handle a couple of mean people.
Right. And finally, he can't take it, and he grabs a cannonball and jumps overboard.
He has a full metal. It's a Full Metal Jacket moment if I ever saw one.
Yeah,
he is. Yeah. He is Private Pile.
But you know, it certainly doesn't help his naming as Jonah at all, because of course once he jumps overboard, the wind comes back up and the ship can get going again.
Well, not until Russell Crowe says that we were all probably a little more mean to that man than we needed to, and we're all very sorry for that, and we should be sorry for that. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, God goes, oh, well, that's nice, and blows a little wind into the sails.
Yeah. And so they get going, they resume the chase, but
I mean, he practically did, he grabs a cannonball, and he's holding it before he jumps off the ship, and I was waiting for him to be like, I am in a world of shit, before he jumped. I was really hoping for that, like, full-blownsies Private Pile moment, but
yeah, basically.
And he kills himself right in front of the 13-year-old kid. He's like, says to the kid, you're the only nice person on this ship. I'm going to murder myself in front of you.
Yeah.
It was lovely. It was lovely. That kid went through a lot, and he just remained a bouncy little cherubic child.
Well, you know, you create sort of your own walls of survival on a ship if you're going to pull that off, I guess.
Yeah.
So they're moving along, and then that idiot Marine captain sees an albatross and decides he wants to shoot it. Have you not read the poetry, man? You don't kill the albatross.
I don't understand how psychotic. But I mean, they murdered every animal they could find back then. Right. I mean, they were just going around whacking auks in the head with shovels because they could. It didn't make any sense. They just killed shit just to kill it. The dodo they murdered for no reason.
Oh, they ate them. They were tasty.
But yeah, and then he shoots the doctor.
Yeah, he's trying to shoot an albatross. I'm like, because the very first time I saw the movie, I'm like, don't shoot the albatross. Haven't you read anything? Oh, I guess you probably haven't. And of course, because he tried to shoot the albatross, he shoots the doctor. The albatross is like, ha ha.
Who was nowhere fucking near the albatross.
But he was the Marine captain, so there was like almost nobody on board who was like, put that fucking thing down, you're gonna kill somebody.
Yeah.
Because he was the Marine captain, and that's the hierarchy, and that's just one of the idiot parts about that. So he tries to shoot the albatross. The albatross makes him shoot the doctor. Fucking
I don't know that
Marines.
the albatross made him shoot the doctor. The fact he couldn't shoot made him shoot the doctor.
Well, yes, but I'm just saying, when you try to kill the albatross, terrible things happen to you.
Yeah, well, I don't know anything about albatrosses. I don't have any albatross-related when
it comes
knowledge.
to sailors, there's a lot of superstition about them.
Ah, I see. And the superstition
Yeah,
is if you kill the albatross.
that's what I'm going on about.
Ah, okay. So it was just a literary device that they jammed into this movie. It was like so everybody in the theater was supposed to go, don't shoot the albatross, you fucking jackass, and bad things are going to happen.
Right.
And they shot the doctor. The only man on earth who could keep them all alive.
If you're like me and went and saw the movie because you enjoyed the book so much, you'd know.
Yes, because you'd already been steeped in the lore of the sea.
Right. Which, of course, clearly people hadn't, because it wasn't that successful a movie, even though it was like a really well-made movie.
This movie is phenomenal. And I really thought it was like a Ridley Scott John or something like that. And it turns out it was made by the guy who did the
Peter
Truman
Weir.
Show.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah,
Peter
I mean,
Weir,
this was not a man who does gritty films. This was a gritty-ass movie, but it wasn't bleak. There was nothing bleak about it. At no time were you like, God damn, this is depressing. But, I mean, anybody else could have turned it into just a real depressing shitfest.
Oh, easy. And there are some very bleak moments. But one moment that's not bleak is so the doctor gets shot. He's got the bullet still in it. He's got a piece of shirt, and he's like, we got to get this out of me because it's going to kill me. And
so is this the doctor who gave him the sword at the end? Because I was like, this man's clearly a bullshit artist. He has no idea what he's talking about. And then when...
Well, he's the surgeon's assistant, and even the doctor knows that his surgeon's assistant. He's like, well, I guess it's better than no doctor. But yeah, the surgeon's assistant's like, I am not killing the doctor. Ah!
Yeah, so they give him some surgical books, and he's trying to, like, cram for him while he's doing shots.
But he can't
he's just
read.
Like, shot of brandy. But he's looking at these surgical books going, oh my God. And then, so they have, I assume they give him some laudanum, but he decides to do the surgery himself, which...
Yeah, they take him ashore. Like, Russell Crowe is like, or Jack Aubry's like, fuck it. Fuck Acheron. You're my friend way more than I want to get this ship, I guess. And so, yes, they do go to the Galapagos and land, and the doctor, operates on himself.
Yes. With a mirror. While everybody's trying not to throw up while he's doing it. And there's people holding him down so he doesn't, like, involuntarily spasm and cut himself worse or whatever. And Captain Aubry is holding his stomach and trying not to puke. And at one point he goes, are you all right? And he just kind of busts a little smile, and the doctor starts laughing because...
Yeah.
But I couldn't... I mean, I was petting Forfin at the time, and I was like, there's no way I could do surgery on her. Like... How I couldn't do surgery on a person that I loved. I don't think I could do surgery on a person, period. But, like, just that would have been awful. And those people played that role perfectly because they really looked like they would rather be dead be doing this.
Oh, on the trip I just took, in order to not have to leave later, I had to take 11 stitches out of my husband's back. And that, like, I had to really sort of, like, do a little mental gymnastics. Now, my sister is an emergency vet, and so she was like, good for you. And I was like, whew.
That is the most satisfying feeling. There's nothing that feels better than the feeling of stitches coming out of your skin. That feeling can't be replicated anywhere. Oh, it feels so
But all I know is I'm really glad I had my good tweezers with me, because the little kit that they gave me, I would have never gotten them out with those janky ass tweezers.
Well, you're a middle school science teacher, so I'm sure you've dissected so many dogfish that you cannot even count them. Right,
but that's different.
But you don't love dogfish.
No.
And they're dead.
And preserved and strange and no, and I mean,
my God, that smell. That's what that boat must have smelled like.
No, not that formaldehyde.
No, but the dead dogfish smell. Before you put them in formaldehyde, when you're just cutting them open. Oh, my God. Oh my God. That's awful. That's awful. That is an awful smell.
Yeah.
Thank God this movie doesn't have smell-o-vision. I mean, we're this close to having smell-o-vision, too. Have you seen, like, the tech news? Yep,
we don't.
We are getting it.
No, don't
it is
need it.
happening.
I will live without that for the rest of my life.
Happening.
No.
We are 10 years away from it being for rich people and 20 away from it being for every TV.
Well, we can move on from the surgery to my favorite food moment in the entire movie.
Cactus liquor.
When they make... Yes!
Yay! Cactus liquor.
It was like prickly pear hooch.
Yes. And apparently prickly pear hooch is really good.
Yeah, no, that was a great moment, and it just sort of showed like how prepared these dudes were to just like get down and make some liquor, because they probably hadn't had much booze on that boat for a while, because they were way outside of their mission parameters. So they were out of beer, they were out of grog, they were out of rum, they were out of everything.
And apparently you make good wine out of that cactus liquor too. So they really they probably thought that was heaven on earth, the Galapagos, when they landed there. They were playing cricket too.
Oh yeah.
I thought that was really cool, because that was really like the very beginnings of modern sports in Britain, and I think that was like the 15th year or something of like modern cricket.
Yeah.
So that like first class cricket is what it's called. So it was pretty new, but it was still like really popular. So it was cool that they just immediately organized a game.
Well, and you sort of think about it, everything in cricket is made of wood. And so these guys could have made all of the equipment themselves.
Out of very fun woods that are unique and native to the Galapagos too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's awesome.
So yeah, it's a great game for these guys to have just like pulled out. But anyway, so the doctor is finally recovering. He goes on a collecting trip. Life is great. He sees the flightless cormorant that he's been chasing this entire time.
Oh, but you skipped over the fact that while he was recuperating, the little kid brought him a picture of a bug, and that he had drawn, and he was like, "Oh my God, this kid's a naturalist just like me." And so he takes the kid on the expedition with him, and he's like, basically now apprentice this kid. This kid's going to be a surgeon naturalist on a boat, kind of thing.
Right, because the kid's kind of bummed. He's like, what can I only do with one arm? I mean, he's not super bummed because Nelson only had one arm, Lord Nelson.
Oh, I didn't know that. And he was given the book. Oh, that's why Russell Crowe gave him the book.
Yeah.
So we skipped over that. But when he was recuperating, Russell Crowe was like, I heard you like to read, and so here's a book. It's about Lord Horatio Nelson, and it's got awesome illustrations, and you're going to love it. And and he knew Lord Nelson, which he said at a dinner. Well, he knew him a little bit, but he served with him a couple of times.
He served under him, yeah.
Yeah, and so this guy's basically, I mean, for me, like the Arnold Schwarzenegger for his life. Yeah, yeah.
Right. That's a perfect way of putting him, because he was the national hero. And yeah, a lot of people got to serve directly under Lord Nelson. And then after the way Napoleon treated his troops after the Battle of the Nile, Nelson was like even bigger heroes. It's like, look how Napoleon treated everybody, and look how Nelson treated everybody. He is the man.
Didn't Napoleon treat his troops well? I thought he was one of those guys who used to go and...
Oh, no, but every time he got into trouble, Napoleon would fuck off and go back to Paris. So after the Battle of the Nile, he just abandoned the French Navy and just fucked off and went to Paris. Same way after his trip to Moscow. Yeah.
He was quick to turn it around. He was like, it's August, guys. I'm going to dip on. I got shit to do in Paris. I got to run the affairs of state and all that. Yeah. I saw a leaf turn yellow. I'm out.
Have fun eating your boots. So at one point, Nelson did lose his arm. And so that was another thing with this kid. Like, hey, there's a lot of stuff that you can still do. Yeah.
Okay, now had I known that would have made that whole thing more meaningful when he gave him that book. But now it makes it more meaningful. So here we go. Better late than never. This movie's so good, and just like Gangs of New York, it's so rich and detailed, and just like Warrior,
right.
And again the woodwork. My God, I love wood. So it's just
Yeah, the construction they did for the different sets is just impressive, and like
so the HMS Surprise was a real boat called the Rose, and Russell Crowe said that's the happiest he's ever been. He loved that ship, and so they had that, and then they built the world's biggest water tank and built another replica ship on that.
Yeah, the tank that they used for a lot of the shots in here, they also used for Titanic.
Yeah, that makes sense. I figured like that in the Meg and whatever other movies, they got to build some weird big thing, and they just got a big water tank now.
Yeah, it's down in Baja, but yeah, like once it's built, like now let's use it for other stuff. Ah!
Exactly.
So the surgeon naturalist, he's going after his flightless cormorant. He comes up over this really cool looking volcanic ridge, and boom!
Which was what, a great auk? Is that
no?
what
It's a flightless cormorant. Like that's a real thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought a cormorant was a type of bird.
It is. And it's just normally the ones that you see at the coast. And if you're like on both the east and the west coast, you'll see them around like ferry docks and stuff. They're these birds that don't really fly, or they don't fly very well, but they swim underwater. And I'm making like swimmy things.
So like flamingos.
And this one just had like no chance of flying. It had sort of like penguin looking wings, basically.
Would a flamingo be like that? That's a flamingo? Is a flamingo a flightless cormorant?
No, a flamingo's a big pink bird that does fly.
Oh, I didn't know they could fly. I thought they just stood there.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'll be damned.
Yeah. I mean, the zoo ones have their wings clipped so they can't fly, but no, I'll have to send you some cool pictures of like Africa and stuff.
I don't want to have any flamingo ever fly at me. Sweet Jesus. No large birds. I'm fine with them existing, just not near me.
Oh, they look so cool in flight. Anyway.
Yeah. From a distance.
From way over there.
From a great distance. I have
there.
Beautiful little cats. I don't want to have to murder any birds because they're trying to murder my cats.
Well, the thing you don't want about flamingos is they are stanky, stanky birds because they eat brine shrimp and poof.
Oh, yeah, I could see that. Although I imagine they'd still smell better than buzzards.
Yeah, that's true. Everything smells better than that.
Well, not a 19th century ship's hull, I can't imagine. Especially after 20 years of use.
Okay, you've got me there.
20 years of funk in that thing.
Oh, yes. Those timbers are saturated.
Saturated with blood, too. Oh, my God. They got rotting blood in there, too. Because at the beginning of the movie, when he's doing surgery and throw more sand on the floor because he started slipping because of all the blood on the deck.
Right.
Jesus, it's soaked into the wood.
So the surgeon climbs up over that cool volcanic ridge, and he looks over, and there's the Acheron, and he's like, oh, my God, I got to get back and tell Jack. And so this time, instead of Jack Aubry yoinking the surgeon away from all of his cool naturalist samples, they realize that they have to drop all of the samples that they've been collecting and hustle back.
The kid realizes it. He turns around. He's like, "Drop those fucking samples. Pick that man up. Let's go."
Because it's putting the cook guy who's carrying the surgeon because he's still kind of hurt. But yeah, that little kid,
they've got like 10 lizards and birds and all that. And luckily, when the doctor said let him go, I was like, "Oh,
he's
thank
like,
God.
open all the cages."
Worried about these imaginary animals, but no, he did. He knew he was on top of it. He let him go.
He's a good man. The surgeon, he is a good man. I mean, he's a great guy. They get back there, and he's like, hey, it's just around the island. And so this is where the heist basically happens in this movie.
The heist?
Sort of like the plan, the tricky plan.
Oh, okay. Yes. Well, you set it up
where they know the ship is thicker, so you can't put cannonballs through the hole. They know the ship is faster. They know basically they're outmatched by this boat in a fair fight. So Jack...
We skipped the other one, which is why I was like, I'm not sure which one she's talking about. Yeah. We skipped the one where they were getting chased again, and then he made this little fake boat so that at night they could trick the other ship into following this little fake boat instead of them, because they extinguished the ship's lights and put lights on another little fake boat that they couldn't see in the dark.
Back before they had come around Cape Horn. They thought they were chasing after the ship, and they realized that the Acheron had snuck up behind them because the Acheron was like hiding out in some cove somewhere waiting for them to go by, and then they come out and they start chasing after them, and Aubrey's like, we just have to make it to sundown. We just have to make it until it gets dark. And so, that's when they like build this barrel thing with a mast on it and a sail on it. And they put one of the kids on there to like put the sails out And then very carefully they extinguish one of the lanterns on the ship and they uncover the lantern on the fake boat. And so then the boat with no lights sails in an entirely another direction, and the fake boat sails on the same course. And that's what the French ship keeps following. And that's sort of how they escape.
Yeah. And I just wanted to bring that up because that was such a great little escape maneuver that they did. And he was a tricky dude. But he gets even trickier this time because the naturalist comes to him and says, check out this thing that we found. And so he looks at it and he says, all right, awesome. He found a stick. And then the doctor hands him a magnifying glass. And Jack Aubry goes, oh, that's not a stick. That's an insect. And what is that? It's called a stick bug or something.
It's just a stick insect. But yes, he's like, ooh, camouflage.
Yes, and so he comes up with the idea that they're going to camouflage themselves as a whaling ship to lure in this ship that has been preying on all these whalers. And that way, when they get them close enough, they'll be able to blast through the hull and kill everybody inside.
Right, and so they repaint the whole ship, which is possible. Because this is one thing that they do a really good job of showing in the movie. There are these sailors crawling all over these boats at all times during the day, scraping paint off, putting new paint on, repairing this, repairing that, hanging off the sides of the ship. And so the fact that they repaint
just
this
scrubbing
whole
the
ship,
decks, yeah.
That's possible. And they put a new name on it. They paint it black. They changed.
They put a really cool camouflage on the front of the ship to make the ship's outline different. Like they changed the profile of the ship because they put a black sheet over it and then painted on fake lines for the ship, and it looked really good from a distance.
Yeah, and because all these guys are looking at each other out of these like handmade spy glasses, so yeah, they could pull that off, and that was really cool. They put up a different flag, and at this point, flying false colors is considered legal-ish if you're at war with somebody, and so I'm not sure what the white flag with the diamond in it was, but they were a whaling ship. And oh my God, Jack Aubry is so disdainful of how whaling ships are run. He's like, we have to look sloppy when we're turning, no saluting, no this,
lubberly.
No that.
Yeah, you got to turn lubberly is what he said.
Yeah. And so, everybody they dress kind of down, and all of the military regalia is gone.
They don't all dress down because the little kid becomes the ship's captain while Captain Jack Aubry is in disguise.
Right, but they all have to stay down below.
Yeah.
But
it was funny. This kid's in a little captain's hat ordering everybody around like he just stepped out of HMS Pinafore, and now he's like commanding troops in a battle convincingly.
And again, they show the midshipmen at school several different times, and so they're learning all of these techniques. Like, all of the British Navy was like 100% on the job training. I mean, you would have like school on the ship to like learn how to use a sextant and how to calculate noon and how to calculate your position and how to calculate the speed and how to make the sails go and how to turn the boat and all of this stuff. But it was all 100% on the job training.
Well, it had to be because they were press ganged onto the ship in the first place.
Well, but not the officers. Remember the officer kids?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they all got on the job training too. And so This was sort of the thing. In this situation where you already have the plan laid out ahead of time, that's an easier time to take charge. And also, all of the regular sailors, they're super pumped up. Like they're ready to do everything that they're supposed to do. So it was a pretty good time for the kid to take over.
Nice.
But then to make the last touch to make it look like a whaling ship is they get all of this black smoke coming out of the galley, because that's the fireplace that they show them putting all the stuff in.
Oh, okay.
And so what they're doing there is they're making it look like this ship has onboard try-works. In other words, they're boiling down the whale oil on board the ship to put it in barrels.
Gotcha. The idea of an entire world industry based on murdering like the smartest creature that isn't us on the planet is fucking crazy. Just to boil them down for their fat.
And they wouldn't even eat the meat.
God help us. What are we?
I mean, occasionally they would, but for the most part, they would not even eat the meat, which is...
Humans are horrible. We are just
disgusting.
The worst. God almighty.
Yeah. And at this point, most of the try-works were on land, but sometimes they were just starting to do them on boats.
Well, it seems like it would be a way more efficient thing to do than hauling around these 4,000, 5,000 ton carcasses or whatever the fuck they are.
Oh, no, it was much worse than that. They would cut the blubber off and then put it in barrels, which would be rotting in the hold until they took it back to shore to boil it down.
Oh, just to add to the milieu. You could see the stink coming off those ships, I bet. Holy shit.
Oh, yeah. So the Acheron sees this smoke, and it sees that it's a whaling ship, and so they're going to come blow this sucker out of the water as well. But Jack has told them to unship the back wheels of their cannons, which means instead of pointing right at the side of the ship, boink, it's pointing up. They're going after the rigging.
They're going after the main mast. Everybody has to shoot the main mast.
Right. And they get right up alongside. I mean, they are super close to the French boat. And yes, so now the 2-foot thick hull isn't necessarily going to stand up. Once they have shot that mast down, that boat can't move. It is dead in the water.
Well, plus they killed half the people who were on the surface or on the who were waiting to board. The people who were on the deck of the ship.
Because they sent a bunch of the sailors up into the rigging, and they're all set with their rifles to shoot them even before they boarded. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a perfect ambush, and it was cool the way they hid all the weapons before they did it, and then hauled all the weapons up into the crow nest and everything.
Oh,
they were ready to go.
Yes. Yeah. And so, they shoot down the rigging. They're shooting all the sailors on board. They pull up alongside. They scramble over on all sorts of stuff. And the ship is silent. The French ship is just dead. And everybody knows, okay, when's it going to come? And then it is. It's just like in Warrior where the two sides clash. They come up from underneath the ship and
One guy yells and then they all just start brawling.
Yeah. And it's a badass brawl. I mean, it looks sloppy as hell, but it's pretty realistic, actually.
You're fighting on a rocking ship where the deck is covered with water. I mean, you don't even have a good footing, so all of the fighting would be a mess. It would be an absolute mess. Except for the doctor, who looked like he was the picture of he was a fencing god. Yes.
There is some
like
good
the Marquis
du
Chevalier. He was just out there hacking people to bits.
One of my favorite moments happens, because they finally get down into the ship where the cannon are, and there's somebody who's about to pull the firing cord on one of the cannon, and he sticks his hand under the striker.
He stops the hammer with the meat of his own hand, which certainly broke his hand. Yeah, and he just made this weird ass look. I think he probably would have screamed because his hand would have been smashed flat as a pancake. But
or punctured, or just,
I don't know what the pressure would have had to have been on a 19th century a hammer for a cannon, but it had to have been crazy.
Yeah. I mean, somebody was much smarter later and just started dousing the firing pins with water so the little firing charge wouldn't go. But that was one of those moments. That was a moment of desperation and just ah! But I hope he got a medal.
Saved a lot of lives.
Yep.
And the little one-armed kid comes charging through. He blows a hole in the side of the ship and then leads his men through it like a fucking boss. He
just comes through and bam! He just shoots the shit out of somebody.
Yeah, he was vicious, leading his men like a champ. And I was like, all right, I guess I see why they're following him.
Yeah. I mean, he's a vicious, strong little kid. I guess he read that Nelson stuff real seriously.
I guess so. Yeah, I guess he needed some hard metal to go with his good looks. He didn't want everybody to be soft.
But yeah, it is a big, messy battle. Finally, the British crew, vanquishes the nasty French frogs.
They raked the other ship. They shot down the mast, and then they used the exact same maneuver on them. Came around behind them and raked the ship.
Yep. And Then it's time to mop up. And what you do is when you capture a ship is you take it as a prize. And so you have to divide your crew up. You make the other ship's crew prisoners, more or less. Typically, a ship's crew, would often just sort of go along because they don't want to die at sea either. They'd rather get to land and...
Yeah, they don't want to drown.
Yeah. They set up the prize crew as they're on the ship, and Jack Aubry is sort of walking around and checking things out and everything. He goes into the surgeon's area, and there's like a picturesquely dead dude lying on the slab there. And some French guy goes, "Oh, the Capitan, he has just died, but he wanted me to give you this sword."
Yes. That was so that was the guy that I was thinking was the doctor at the beginning, but yeah.
No. It was a French guy. And so Jack's like,
I must have been taking notes while that happened.
Yeah, it was. And yeah, Jack was more or less, well, gosh, that was a pretty honorable thing to do. Like, a good fight at sea is a good fight at sea. So let's end this on a good note. And so, like his first mate, basically the second in command, gets to take the prize ship away, which is a huge honor. He's super excited about this. Like, it's going to be my first captaincy, and everything's great, right?
Wrong, because apparently that was the ship's captain.
Yeah, Jack Aubry isn't the only tricky bugger at sea.
Yeah, well, you would think at this point, when they had just been doing this to each other constantly, that maybe they would be a little more suspect about what the other people have to say about themselves.
Right. But this is very true to Jack Aubry's character. He really wants to believe in the nobility of everybody else. Like, he'll do dirty, dastardly tricks in pursuit, but at the end, he's like, but now we have to be, square gentlemen about it. Like, that is very true to Jack Aubry's character.
Ah, nice. And this movie really was... It really felt like more like 2 episodes of a series as opposed to like, because it was a 2.5 hour movie. This is a long ass movie, so it could have been a mini series all by itself. And I think it felt like a mini series to me.
And they sort of smooshed together like 3 books.
Oh, okay. Well, then that would do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, overall, it's still fun. And they get back on the boat, and they're chit chatting with each other. And it was the boat surgeon who was like, "Oh, no, you couldn't have been talking to the ship's doctor. The ship's doctor died like a couple of months ago. I was talking to some other dudes."
Well, so he's just told the doctor, he's like, "Yeah, we're going to the Galapagos Islands. Right where you wanted to go. We're going to get you a bunch of specimens. It's going to be awesome. We're going to have the best time. We're going to sing songs while we do it." And then he's like, "And look at this badass sword that this dude gave me. He was the nicest guy. Ship surgeon. He said that the captain wanted me to have it. It was cool." But so the Galapagos. And then the doctor's like, "Yeah, their ship surgeon died months ago of disease." And he was like, "Oh, well, we're fucking turning around then." And he just gives the orders to arms, or what he beat to
quarters.
Beat to quarters, which means they're going to war. And then let's go chase that ship.
And the doctor's like, "But
yeah."
And Jack Aubry's like, "They're flightless cormorants, man. They're not going anywhere." And then they play...
Oh, that was such a great line. You did say those birds were flightless, right? And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Yeah, so they're not going anywhere."
Yeah.
I actually said those words before he said it, because I was like, that's the perfect setup. It's the perfect setup.
And then we get a nice musical send-off and sailing off in
Not
pursuit.
only a musical send-off, but a send-off using pizzicato, showing that Jack Aubry had learned his lesson. Now he is one of the people. So whereas before he had been playing his violin like a normal person with a bow, he switched to strumming it like a little guitar, which is called pizzicato. And he and the doctor both did it, showing that they are just as cool as the guys who like to dance to music.
There you go. So much better film than our other 2 in-between selections here. Much less...
This was phenomenal. Yeah. I'm so glad you recommended it. It was amazing.
Because, we were talking about this, that, and the other, and it's like, no, come on. This is a fun one.
It's phenomenal. I'm so glad. And I recommend it to everybody. You got to watch this movie. It is great. And because you guys asked for recommended reading, the stuff that I used, because in case you just want to learn about buggery in the British Navy, because it is kind of interesting to learn how much man-on-man action was happening in the British Navy, in every Navy back then, because one British officer that I read an account from said that every ship that he had been on, he had seen multiple encounters by people, but it paled in comparison to the French and the Austrians, who he said just like it was an accepted part of being at sea, and nobody said shit about it. It was just like, we're a bunch of dudes on a ship. Somebody's got to get off. We all got to get off. Let's help each other out. So, but yeah, I used Buggery in the British Navy by Cecil Adams from 2008. Sodomy and the Pirate Tradition is a book by Barry Berg, and I crammed through a bunch of that today. And there's also an article by Amy Anderson, a sample of 19th century sailors' food, which was just, it was a little thing. They were doing a dinner up in Maine, and so they recreated duff and lobscouse, because I was trying to figure out what the hell went into it.
Yeah, there's no lobster and lobscouse. That's what everybody should know right off the They have nothing to do with each other. Yeah, and if you're looking for some fun fiction, you want to do less statistics and more sort of idealized everything. Patrick O'Brian's books, which this is based on, and then for sort of really light.
Wow, I wonder if he's Irish. So Paddy O'Brien is, I bet he wrote himself as the ship doctor, because he was the Irish guy. He was the only Irish guy in that. Yeah.
And if you want to,
Paddy O'Brien.
And if you want something that's even a little more idealized, but sort of embraces a certain amount of absurdity, C.S. Forester's Horatio Hornblower series is a lot of fun. C.S. Forester is a really good writer for an early 20th century writer. He's extremely entertaining.
All right. I've heard of that book, but I've never read it.
Yeah, it's a series. It's more sort of, it would fall into sort of like YA fiction, which is why it's a really light and kind of easy read. But he also wrote a nonfiction book called The Age of Fighting Sail, which is one of the better pre-1980 history books I have ever read.
I have a sense that I've at least read chunks of that book for college. Yeah, because that definitely rings a bell.
He is a very good nonfiction writer for the age. Because most of the stuff written before about 1980, I tend to skim and just sort of flip through and find what I'm looking for, because it's written in this very didactic style. But his writing is very entertaining. It also seems like
9/10 of the history books that were written between 1945 and 1980 were about World War II. And Jesus, could we fucking get over World War II?
Okay, yeah, and The Age of Fighting Sail is he's mainly writing about the War of 1812, but he's like, nope, I'm not talking about any sort of powered shipping. It's all sail.
So that book would cover a lot of what you're covering in your podcast now, about all the stupid little wars America was fighting that we don't even know about.
Oh yeah.
The quasi quasi war, the Barbary Wars, all those weird wars.
Yeah, there's this really funny period when the U.S. has a navy of 17 ships, and they're like, hey, British, we'll come over to the Mediterranean, kick some people around too. We can do that.
We got 17 ships, and 2 of them were yachts yesterday.
No, the U.S. at that point did have sort of some of the most enviable shipbuilding. They were building these fast fucking boats. Everybody was doing whaling ships and slave ships, and you just wanted to get around quickly. Yep.
Well, Americans have been in a rush ever since we started being Americans. That's one of the things that I read over and over and over when I was researching colonial American diets, was the Europeans were like, what the fuck is wrong with Americans? They eat like they are trying to shovel it in right before they're being executed or something. Like they got to die on a full stomach. But we've always eaten crazy fast. We eat massive amounts, and we don't even pay attention to what the hell we're eating. That has been happening since the signing of the Constitution.
At least
we just do everything fast and hard and badly usually, but we do it fast and hard.
Loudly.
Yes, louder. But I think actually the Dewey Cox movie where he invented punk by singing that song over and over again. He just kept going faster, louder. That is America in a nutshell.
Yeah, I'm beginning to feel that way about it. Well, I think next week we should get back to Warrior because, all right, I give up. I want to get caught up. So
yes, and it's so good. But we still want recommendations people. If you guys want us to cover something, let us know. We'll do it.
Yep. And I like this, reading list stuff that we're reading, adding that in. It can go the other way. If somebody's read something badass and they want to share it with us, I have, for my own podcast, I've gotten some great book recommendations from people who said, "Oh, do you know about this one?" And we'll throw those out as well.
Nice. And I think that doctor, speaking of books that we have recently read, I read the Sawbones book, which is from a podcast called the Sawbones Podcast, right?
Sawbones, yeah.
Yeah, and I've never actually listened to the podcast, but the book is fascinating. And just reading about the way that medical science advanced itself in the 19th century is fascinating. And it's like one of the only times you read about Scotland ever. So it's because Edinburgh was the place to learn medicine back in the day, so it makes that doctor even more plausible in that respect. But so cool. That's a great book.
Of course, it also meant Scotland was where they pioneered the idea of grave guns. If you were rich and you got buried in Edinburgh, you'd sort of booby trap your grave so the grave robbers wouldn't come dig you up when you were still fresh.
So they sell your body to the doctors so they could pull you apart again. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
That is unreal.
So all sorts of weirdness.
It's so much fun.
Okay, well, so what are you up to these days when you're not yelling about boats?
When I'm not yelling about boats, I am writing about other stuff that almost never has to do with boats at all. But at Plague of Strength on Instagram. I have a website, plagueofstrength.com, but I haven't written anything new in a little while. I got to finish I have a series on PEDs, on performance-enhancing drugs, that needs a last part. It's so I did like the ancient times, which was like way back in the day, 12,000 years ago, to maybe the Greek era, and then I covered how much cannabis has been used as a performance-enhancing drug in the second part. Third part needs to be devoted entirely to cocaine.
All right. Well, it's funny about the cannabis because I just heard some ads recently on a couple of podcasts where they're talking about doing microdosing to help you have a better workout. So that one appears to have come around full circle.
There you go. I wouldn't say I microdose, but before I have a workout, it's more of a megadose. But yeah.
But I'm just saying, it's really funny that like even in popular culture and advertising, that one has reappeared.
Finally, I mean, given the fact that the oldest kettlebell we have is from 2600 BC and the statues we have from that civilization in Bactria are super jacked, and that was one of the heaviest like cannabis using cultures in history, I would say that the link is pretty strong. Also, the word ganja is Sanskrit, and it was a pre-workout drink basically that they made for warriors before they go into battle, made of cannabis and ephedra.
Yeah, the long-term effects of doing cannabis and working out have got to be a lot better for you overall than doing a lot of coke and working out.
Yeah, coke is a great pre-workout, but it definitely takes years off your life. And so at this time in South America, at the time that we were watching this movie, those Brazilians were probably filled to the gills with cocaine because the Incan Empire was based on cocaine. They actually measured distance in like how much they would have these little
But it was chewing the leaves.
Yeah, it was coca leaves that it wasn't actually processed.
Right, it's a much less intense experience.
Yeah, that's why part 2 has all the coca stuff in it, and then part 3 is going to be the cocaine, the 19th century, the good stuff. The Vin Mariani years. So I'm going to try to get that out in the next couple of weeks.
All right, very cool. Well, on my podcast, The History of American Food, I am working my way through the early war years of the United States, 1776 to 1815, when this country was a baby, but fighting with goddamn everyone, and just sort of how that changed the food scene. And then on November 4th, we're together, like you and me, Jamie, talking together at the Intelligent Speech Online History Conference. And we have a discount code for tickets. It's food. We will be talking about what the contingencies for women when they no longer had fathers or husbands.
Yay!
And I will leave the information for the Intelligent Speech Online Conference in the show notes.
Sweet! That's awesome. I'm really excited about that. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm an official big kid now.
All right. Well, we will see you next week. We will be back into Kung Fu Land. No, Warrior Land, because we don't need to go back to Kung Fu for a while.
No, I don't think we need to revisit another episode of Kung Fu. I think we've reached a sufficiency. I was thinking maybe we should do the Harrison Ford and William Shatner episodes, but why put ourselves through that?
Well, we'll see. You know, when we get further down the road, we might want to revisit it, but we might also come to our senses. We'll see. All right. Well, we will see everybody next week.
All right. Enjoy.
Bye. Last quick thing to send you off this week, we have a little bit of fan art to share with everyone. So enjoy.
Podcast you don't want to miss. We got freaks, gangsters, and pugilists. Take a trip with me if you want to see how grisly was the 19th century. Turn on HBO, watch that Warrior show. Then we gonna watch the gangs of NYC. Grab some Hennessy and raise a toast, cause now we about to meet both of the hosts. Jamie lifts weights, but there's more to him, cause he's also the people's historian. Greta Harden on the mic, a charmer, also goes hard in for those female farmers. Grab a trip, relax, and spark a lighter for circus freaks, gangsters, and prize fighters. Whoa.
Hey guys!
Yes, Ben?
Due to a hilarious mishap involving a banana peel and a sharp blow to the head from a pineapple, I have amnesia.
Oh no!
Oh no!
Apparently, we're going to be running a podcast conference called Intelligent Speech on a thing called the Internet, but I don't remember anything about it. Could you bring me up to speed?
Oh, well that seems like an unlikely conceit, but sure. Intelligent Speech is an online conference that connects thoughtful online content creators with their community in an intense one-day online event. This is our 5th year conducting the conference and our 4th running the conference online. Our event this year will be taking place November 4th from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. EST.
The conference is a 3-ring circus of content with around 24 hours of live presentations and roundtables happening in 4 digital rooms. Each session has 20 minutes of content and plenty of time for questions from the devoted audiences. There are also 3 keynote speakers, Sebastian Major of Our Fake History, Daniele Bolelli of History on Fire, and Rebecca Larson of Tudor's Dynasty Podcast.
Wow, that sounds intense. What if 2 people are like her presenting at the same time? Or I get a pie in the face and can't make it?
Well, good news. The entire event will be recorded for ticket holders to view later at their leisure. Wait, pie?
Hold on. A ticket. How do I get one of those?
Easy. Just go to our website at intelligentspeechonline.com, go to the tickets page, and buy a ticket today.
There's a link in the show notes, of course.
What?
The tickets are $30, but we are running an early bird special where the tickets are only $20.
And even better, as a listener to this show, you will be able to get an additional 10% off by using the coupon code they will provide you in the show notes or in a minute. What an amazing deal!
Ben, was this just an elaborate ploy to get us to read an ad?
Quite likely. So go to intelligentspeechonline.com and get your ticket today. The host of this podcast will be there.